Welcome, Coral Reef Aquarium School Basic. Today is our 13th episode and we will be talking about the cleanup crew. Let's get started. First, I'd like to say that this is a really fascinating area of reef keeping, one of many, and we will unfortunately only scratch the surface of the area of reef cleaners. And think for yourself, or start imagining all the specialist animals that are at work at the coral reef, such a sensitive ecosystem. And to mention a few, we have snails, hermit crabs, sea urchins, sea stars, sea cucumbers, and all the fish, filefish tanks, and not to mention or forget the shrimps as well. In this course, we will focus on the basic non-reef cleaners. And the first one is a family of snails. And I will typically focus on the variants of snails that are traded as Trochus or Astrea. And this is a snail, typically nocturnal, grazing snail that feed on algae such as diatoms and green algae. And how many of these snails should you install in a tank? I'd say roughly 1 snail per 20 liters. That would equal 2 snails per gallon. If you go for a more dense population in a small aquarium, you need to consider supplementary feeding or reduced skimming, so you have a higher algae production. And here, I think I also need to mention what type of vision or what type of mentality should you have when you start populating your reef. What's important is that you find the balance of the ecosystem. And if it helps you, think of it like find the harmony where all the animals, they play in sync and in balance. And the snails here, they start to become one piece of a much bigger puzzle. And this is what we'll start to establish now. Okay, let's go back. If you go for a larger tank, typically you go for a less dense snail population because you complement with, for instance, grazing fish. Grazing fish can be the foxface or some of the tanks. And typically why you don't put them in the smaller tanks is that they need a bigger volume to do well and to thrive. They don't do well in a nano tank. It's not nice. Okay, some of the benefits with snails are obviously their grazing capability for some of the nuisance algae, and also that they are contributing to the ecosystem and also the balance of the ecosystem. So you have nutrients that has been absorbed by algae, return to the system, and they become food for corals or eventually leave the system. Before leaving this area of snails, I must mention that snails are sensitive to salinity and temperature. So it is important that you acclimatize the snails when you buy them from the fish shop. You need to acclimatize them slowly. Don't rush, you might kill them. So take long time to acclimatize them to your water conditions. Okay, second animal is also snail, but we refer to them as the Nassarius snails. And the reason being why we're interested in this snail is that as we're keeping sand in the aquarium, it makes sense to graze and also shift the sand. And we don't want to do that manually. We will hire someone, or even we will actually buy them to do the job for us. And the Nassarius snail is a very good inhabitant in a nano reef aquarium. On the population side, we also have the same population density, somewhere 1 snail per 20 liters or 2 snails per gallon. And if you go for a larger tank, typically you go for a less dense snail population, and you complement with, for instance, bigger critters or animals such as sand-shifting sea stars. And one of those genders is the Arcastus typicus. Benefits with this snail is reduce the risk of problems with having nutrients accumulating in the tank, and if you avoid accumulating nutrients in the sand, you will yield stability to your aquarium. And this snail is also contributing in a similar manner as previous one to the ecosystem of the tank. This snail as well is sensitive to salinity and temperature, so acclimatize it slowly. And one more tip about this snail. We haven't started feeding the aquarium, so we don't have much food, waste or detritus accumulated in the sand. So in some sense, the sand is sterile. So it could make sense to wait a few weeks before we introduce this snail in the aquarium, because we don't want to starve it. We want it to start feeding and grazing the sand. Final animal we talk about are the hermit crabs. And hermit crabs are omnivorous. They graze algae and scavenge the tank and rock to pick up leftover food and other nutrients. And I think in small aquariums, the hermit crab complement snails very well, because they can digest or work with bigger pieces of food than the snail can. My personal preference is to go for smaller hermit crab, less than 1 inch or 25 millimeters. Because the reason being, if you go for the larger crabs, they carry a larger shell, they are stronger, and they can flip and break loose coral colonies. And then you risk one colony falling into another when you're not home, and then they will start fighting. And I typically want to avoid my corals fighting with each other. I want them to thrive, focus their energy on growing. Population density, I say somewhere 1 to 2 crab per 20 liters, being 2 to 4 per gallon. If you go for a more dense population, you will have to feed them because you don't want to starve them. And in large tanks, typically less dense, for the same reason being that you have the grazing fish available here. And on the hermit crabs, I also would like to give a tip, which is quite important. As the crab grows, it will want to change shell. So you need to provide them with supplementary shells that are bigger than the ones they are currently carrying. It is definitely an animal-friendly gesture. Okay, that said about cleaning crew, we've only scratched the surface. In our next episode, we will be talking about fish. And with that said, also, we will do as we usually do. We face over to the project session, and I hope you stay tuned and see you in that episode. Okay, for the practical session about the cleanup crew, I will be using 2 red-banded Trochus snails. Had this been a larger tank, I would have been using different types of cleaner snails, but for this tank, being as small as it is, I think it will fit 2 snails, and I will go with the Trochus. What I like about them is that they're very, very fast snails, not so thorough, so sometimes I typically mix them with a more slower snail, but they will cover a lot of ground in this aquarium quite quickly and be working on the algae and do a good job. On top of that, I'll do 3 small hermit crabs. They're retailed as Calstinus spp, and I know them previously from another aquarium, and this is actually a very, very efficient. I go with a smaller hermit crab because these tend to create less problems to tear off corals or something from the rock or from where we position them. So typically if I go with hermits, I prefer the smaller ones. I also have an extra an extra shell if they start outgrowing the shells they have. But what I don't like about the extra shell I got is that it's actually smaller than already the other shells they are populating. So I will get some extra ones later, bigger shells. Now, I didn't get the Nassarius, but I don't think the Nassarius snail We will introduce 2 Nassarius snails as well to be working with the sand, but as we don't have any fish, there's not much food in the sand, so I think it's too early to introduce the Nassarius, but they will get there eventually. Now, as this is live animals, I think it's very important that you acclimatize and adjust them to your water conditions. Typically, the way I do it is over a period of 1 to 2 hours, I will gradually increase the level of water by pouring in aquarium water in the bag. Typically I do it at least 6 times, but not more than 10 times. Sometimes when there was a lot of water in the bag, I even pour out some of the water ahead of acclimatization, or during acclimatization I pour it back into the aquarium. The idea is that when you get the bag, when you get it from the fish store, it is 100% fish store water, and after 6 or 10 times it should be 100% aquarium water basically. Then they're fit for a tank. Okay, I think it's pretty basic and straightforward how to pour in water into a bag, so I will not show it or pour out. We will see shot a little bit later when I'm done with the acclimatization and introduced the animals into the aquarium. Okay, I think now they're in the tank. The hermit crabs, they found their way down on the sand to work with the silicate algae, and the snails, they so far keep to the rock. You will see 1 snail on the left side, and the other one actually he ran off completely into the back of the structure quite quickly. Okay, this is nice. Now we have some live in the aquarium. Okay, there's 1 hermit crab. He's attempting to ride one of the Trochus snails. That said, we will leave them to their work and hope they get the job done. Bye bye.